Thank you, Senator Tillis, for the kind introduction and for your bipartisan leadership in such area of concern to the American Legion as burn pit exposure, timely VA health care delivery, and career opportunities for veterans. And Chairman, if I might, before I proceed, I'd like to take a moment to recognize all of the past national commanders of the American Legion. Gentlemen and lady, would you please stand? And the past American Legion Auxiliary past national president and current president Nicole Clapp. And past national commander of the Sons of the American Legion and their current national commander Clint Bolt. Folks, we got a great team. And I'd also like to say thank you to the members of the House and Senate Committees on Veterans Affairs for once again giving us this opportunity. The American Legion has delivered the legislative priorities of our nation's veterans and their families to Congress in hearings just like this for more than 10 decades. And those priorities have produced impressive results. Fair health care and timely benefits for veterans disabled by military service, from mustard gas to Agent Orange to IEDs. A code of respect for the U.S. flag, an arm of the federal government solely dedicated to the needs of veterans. Veterans preference hiring, a GI Bill of Rights that changed the world and continues to do so. Recognition and pursuit of effective treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder among veterans. Support for caregivers of disabled veterans. Improved services for women. Our journey can be traced back to the original purpose of the American Legion when World War I veterans came home to virtually no help or support from the government that sent them to fight. Our mission today is a continuation of the work they began. From World War I, we learned that we needed a VA. From World War II, we saw what could be accomplished for the entire nation through GI Bill benefits and veterans preference hiring. The Vietnam War later produced an expectation of accountability from the federal government that veterans exposed to toxic herbicides during their service and those who came home with invisible wounds would not be dismissed or forgotten. We continue this mission on all those fronts. Between Vietnam and 9/11, the American Legion and Congress worked together to reinvent the Veterans Administration, one that is now described, and I quote, the best care anywhere. Today, so many of these issues and new ones for a new generation continue to occupy the American Legion's priority list. That's because the American Legion, Congress, the VA, the Pentagon, and the White House all share in a continuous mission to ensure that these important laws and policies are effectively implemented, given critical oversight, and are constantly improved. Implementation, oversight, improvement. That triad is the prevailing theme in the American Legion legislative priority list for the second session of the 116th Congress. Let me start with VA health care. Much has been promised and even more is expected from the VA Mission Act. That legislation was born of a deadly crisis 6 years ago when veterans whose medical appointments were not scheduled, even though some in the VA falsely claimed they were. We've all worked hard over the last 6 years to convert that crisis into confidence in the VA's future. Today, we're in a better place on VA accountability, but an overriding issue attached to the meltdown of 2014 persists: timely access to care. As we press forward with such innovations as Project Atlas, which aims to make good use of American Legion post homes to provide VA telehealth services for veterans, we remain highly concerned about another issue: oversight of non-VA providers. We understand the primary objective, delivery care for veterans as quickly and efficiently as possible, but the long-term strategy must not lead the VA any further down the road of privatization. In some areas where community care has been offered through the Choice Program, which the Mission Act replaces, non-VA providers are unwilling to accept VA patients due to compensation differences or timely payments. That leaves serious concern that veterans will be forced to seek out the provider of least resistance rather than VA's best care anywhere. We must always remember why the VA is special and must be protected. You will find these reasons in the testimony books before you today. In them, you will see, for instance, how treatment for combat-caused PTSD and TBI is a VA responsibility, not one delegated to the private sector. Advances in alternative therapies for these conditions are coming from veterans and VA success stories, stories we're still discovering every day, from equine therapy to yoga to peer support to clown therapy to PTRMS. These are dots for the VA to connect to support in support of veterans facing PTSD, not for other providers. When you combine the chronic pain of military injuries with PTSD or TBI, and then prescribe a pharmaceutical cocktail to blot it all out, a common result is isolation. And isolation is a major contributor in the most heartbreaking issue facing veterans today, the high suicide rate. The American Legion conducted an online mental health survey in 2019 that showed of respondents, 30% personally knew a veteran who died by suicide. 67% indicated they would be willing to get formal suicide prevention training to help reduce the rate. As more and more victims of military sexual trauma step forward to report these unthinkable violations of trust, we must stand together behind the American Legion policy on this matter, zero tolerance. But for survivors, we call on Congress to provide emphatic oversight to ensure that VA is well-resourced to install effective, discreet, and easily accessed services administered by qualified professionals for these veterans. And like treatment for PTSD and TBI, care for MST survivors is a VA responsibility, not a provider unlikely to understand the military dynamics involved. Women veterans are currently over 2 million and are increasing by nearly 18,000 per year and represent the fastest growing group entering the VA system. We have found that VA medical services specifics to their needs are inconsistent and lacking in many areas. In our shared vision to provide oversight and make improvement in critical areas, we must continue to ask our nation's VA healthcare facilities how they are fulfilling the needs of women veterans, hold them accountable to necessary changes, and critically measure their performance in the name of responsible oversight. The American Legion System Worth Saving and Regional Office Action Review site visits provide our organization important insights into the challenges and best practices of the VA medical system in local communities. Typically, these visits begin with town hall meetings where veterans openly discuss the performance of their VHA and VBA providers. I'd like to invite members of Congress and their staff to join us in these events for the most important level of oversight, firsthand from the veterans we serve. Each year, the American Legion prepares and distributes a System Worth Saving report to members of Congress and the Veterans Administration so they can use our findings to implement changes and share success stories that can be emulated elsewhere in the system. Significant progress has been made at VBA to reduce the backlog of undecided claims and appeals, and the Appeals Modernization Act is already exceeding expectations. We're confident this will continue as we watch the backlog shrink in the months ahead. Significant progress has also been made to roll out the Forever GI Bill, the biggest expansion of that benefit in over a decade. But the American Legion has some serious GI Bill concerns that need legislative attention, one of which is immediate, the other to help prevent the problem in the future. We call on Congress to pass the Protect the GI Bill Act to reinstate benefits for students whose for-profit schools went out of business before they finished their degree programs. These veterans were often aggressively recruited by for-profit schools and are stuck with no degree and no GI Bill benefits to seek an education elsewhere. Once that's accomplished, we further ask Congress to pass the Veterans Education and Taxpayer Spending Act to close what is known as the 90-10 loophole, which now counts VA and DOD education funding as, and I quote, private dollars. They're not private dollars, they're government dollars, just like any other federal student aid. This loophole has led to aggressive and even deceptive recruitment by for-profit schools, which in the worst cases have left veterans without degrees and drained of their GI Bill benefits. If history has taught us anything, the forever GI Bill will not by any means be the final GI Bill. The American Legion will always be looking to improve it. On January 1st, 2020, the VBA began reviewing Blue Water Navy Act claims. We're thankful that this bipartisan legislation was finally signed into law last year on behalf of tens of thousands of Vietnam War veterans suffering from diseases related to their offshore exposure to Agent Orange. Disability benefits for those veterans were wrongly suspended many years ago, and many of them have died from their service-connected conditions since then, so this implementation is long overdue. More recently, the National Academy of Medicine has recommended that 4 new conditions be added to the list as presumptively caused by Agent Orange exposure: bladder cancer, hyperthyroidism, hypertension, and Parkinson's-like symptoms. Science backs up the argument that these conditions need to be added now, but to our knowledge, no action has been taken. We call on Congress to give those disabled veterans the care and recognition they so rightly earned. Implementation, oversight, improvement. We have, in military terms, a target-rich environment. The American Legion is firing on those targets at the community, state, and national level. One example of the Legion's commitment to veterans and military personnel came a little over a year ago when our organization raised and delivered over $1 million in cash grants, not loans, to junior enlisted Coast Guard families whose paychecks were delayed by the government shutdown. In addition to the grants, local posts across the country collected food, diapers, toiletries, and fulfilled other needs for these Coast Guard families with children at home. To prevent this from ever happening again, we ask that you urge your colleagues in appropriate committees to pass the Pay Our Coast Guard Act. That measure will exempt members of the Coast Guard, just like any other branch of service, from pay disruption in the event of a shutdown. Passage of the Legion Act last summer gave long-awaited recognition to more than 1,600 Americans who have died or were wounded in service outside previously designated war areas. It is a fact that our nation has been in a perpetual state of armed conflict since December 7, 1941. We owe all who have served since then the same level of respect as others who swore with their lives to protect our nation. We're confident that the VBA will continue to improve the VA claims and appeals processes. Like Dr. Paul Lawrence, Undersecretary for Benefits at VA, we want 2020 to be VBA's hashtag campaign says, the best year ever. We stand against privatizing the VA healthcare system, but we continually stand for its improvement. That kind of oversight and advocacy, we believe, can and will make the VA the best care anywhere. We intend to work hard, arms length with Congress and the administration to improve treatment of PTSD, build a better care environment for women veterans, help the homeless get on their feet, demand that VA claims are resolved faster and accurately, protect student veterans from GI Bill abuses, and continue assisting in the difficult transition from military service to civilian life. Nearly all of our marching orders can be found in one form or another throughout the history of the American Legion's relationship with Congress. Many of our shared accomplishments can be credited to a generation of veterans whose war ended 75 years ago this year. The men and women who turned their GI Bill benefits into a half century of American prosperity and fought to make the VA what it is today. In 2017, the American Legion National Convention passed a resolution to exempt from means testing all living World War II veterans not already enrolled in the Veterans Administration. This is not unprecedented. A similar measure was passed in 1996 for the last living veterans of the Spanish-American War and World War I. About 75% of surviving World War II veterans are already enrolled in the Veterans Administration, so this does not amount to a large number. It would be a small gesture of gratitude for these men and women to whom the world owes so much. As we renew our vows to those who served our nation so effectively and bravely today, let's remember those who came before us and grant them access into the system of respect and care they helped invent. Thank you. God bless America's veterans, and God bless America.